All right, we're back with Esperanza Fonseca. Thanks for sticking with me to do this little bonus segment. Brought you on for May Day to talk about work. There's a kind of work that is the subject of a lot of controversy and or kind of labor, I guess we could say, that's the subject of a lot of controversy. And it's actually how I got to know you and your work. I first read a piece you wrote on Medium called, if I'm remembering correctly, A Socialist Feminist Transgender Analysis of quote unquote sex work. And you put it in quotes. And then you proceed to tell your own story. And I'm definitely going to include the link in the video description, because I think everyone should read it and really consider it. I'm going to be asking you about some lyrics about the topic of sex work, prostitution, the sex trade, whatever you want to call it. But before you do that, some context, Esperanza, like, how do you come at this topic? What's your relationship to it?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna, recount everything I wrote in the essay, although I would urge everyone to read it. Sort of poured my heart into it and my brain. But I'm someone who is affected by the sex trade generationally. I won't say too much about that, but when you grow up struggling, you know, it's typical that you're probably not the only one in your family that's had to turn to that. And so there are people that I descend from, women who have also had experience with that industry. And then myself, when I started transitioning, I was fired from my job and I lost my housing. And so I had to enter the sex trade. And, when I had left it, and it took me several years to process everything that I had gone through. I lost 4 friends who died in the sex trade, some that are still in it. And I realized that the narrative we're hearing in the mainstream political discourse right now among the left is completely disconnected from reality.
How so?
And so I wanted to investigate it and basically write on that.
Right. So the discourse that we grew up with, that I grew up with in the 80s, right, is you have the right wing who condemn women, who condemn women, period, no matter whether they're in the sex trade or not, on any issue from abortion to whatever. There's a lot of shaming and moralizing coming from the Christian right. And then on the left, there's a kind of live and let live, laissez-faire, freedom. Obviously, we want people to be safe, but we don't want the state to tell people what to do in their bedrooms, like my old Prime Minister Justin Trudeau famously said, right?
Wrong! It was actually Justin's dad, Pierre Trudeau, back when he was the Justice Minister in 1967. Very different context, though. He was passing laws decriminalizing homosexuality.
And these days, the discourse in the past decade has very swiftly moved into, from what I can tell, and I'm not like an expert on it, but it seems to be, and I've heard this from a lot of circles, like sex work is work, period, which means if you criticize the sex trade, you are shaming or castigating or stigmatizing those who are in it, that we should, quote unquote, listen to sex workers, although strangely not sex workers like you have been somehow, But so talk to me about this, where we're at in the conversation about it, because it can be so difficult to even speak about given the way the conversation is framed.
Yeah. So, I think that that people are so dogmatic about this issue that this is like the greatest achievement of the people who profit from the sex industry, the pimps, the capitalists, because they have been able to conflate their interests as the exploiting class in the sex industry with the interests of the exploited class. And they basically use their bodies as a shield to deflect any criticism. So, for example, the CEO of MindGeek, the CEO of OnlyFans, the people
MindGeek,
who profit,
a Canadian company, shamefully.
yes, And they're the largest monopoly, the largest conglomerate, porn conglomerate in the world.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that, any criticism of their company, of their industry, gets conflated with this moral condemnation of those of us who are in the sex trade to survive. And that is a strategy that they have used to deflect criticism from their industry. You know, uh, I like Andrea Dworkin. I'm not a radical feminist, but I love Andrea Dworkin. And she talks about how leftists hate capitalism until the commodity is the woman's body, right? Leftists hate racism until someone's having an orgasm from it, you know? And I think that's really telling
Wow.
about our culture on the left today.
So you don't buy, in other words, because some people might hear you say you're talking about the people who profit from it. Some people might say, okay, sure, there may be, chains of command or chains of profit that need to be dismantled so that women at the sort of entrepreneurial, independent operator level can make a decent living and do it in safety and do it without harassment from the police. That what we're trying to get to is a place where it's a regulated, sort of normalized kind of business, so that an enterprising person with a good head on their shoulders can make a more than a subsistence living at it and not face physical danger. What's wrong with that point of view about it?
Yeah, so the reality is that when you look at the sex trade throughout history, it started, in the enslavement of women and children in ancient societies like Mesopotamia. But in every legal framework it's under, whether the full decriminalization model of New Zealand, the full legalization model of Germany, um, or the full criminalization model that we have mostly in the US, I mean, the violence does not go away.
Mm-hmm.
The coercion does not go away.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at New Zealand, for example, it's mostly Indigenous women who are in the sex trade. They still don't have the right to exit, so they're still stuck in it. 7 women have been killed in New Zealand who are in the sex trade since pimps and johns were decriminalized. So the reality is that this fantasy that you are going to be able to make it safe by decriminalizing the people who cause the violence, which are the pimps and the sex buyers, is just complete, like sort of rubbish, you know? And I think that the reason why is because you have to look at the basic contradiction in the sex trade. So a money transaction masks a social relationship, right? And in the sex trade, it is a power struggle. Um, the the client or the John always wants you to do more for less, whereas
Mm-hmm.
you always want to do less for more, and that is a struggle. And the thing is that that struggle plays itself out over our bodies and inside of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the client is always the one with the power because
Mm-hmm.
we need the money more than he needs the orgasm. So that
Mm-hmm.
puts him naturally in a dominant position of power.
Right.
And when sex is based on a power imbalance or on exploitation or on coercion, we have a name for that. It's rape and it's sexual violence. And so, for example, there was this one woman who was in the sex trade in New Zealand, and she was interviewed after full decriminalization. And they said, "What has changed?" And she said, "Not much, because he is still the one with the money, and therefore he is still the one with the power."
Mm. Right. So power dynamics don't go away when, quote unquote, consent is given or a certain amount of currency is handed over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what does happen when you decriminalize pimps and sex buyers is that the sex industry grows. And because of that, the coercion, the amount of women forced into it also grows because it's
Mm-hmm.
when sex work is work, what's the problem if, thousands and thousands of women lose their job due to a pandemic and recession and have no other way of making it but by entering the sex industry? Then
Mm-hmm.
it's just a job like any other. And then at
Right.
that point, then you have to the next step is to say that there's no real difference between sexual trauma and sexual violence and other kinds of violence. And I think that's wrong. It's different to have to allow a man to enter me so I could pay my rent versus having to wash dishes. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the ways that I got acculturated to thinking about the sex trade as kind of normal and just a part of the world that I would have to get used to was listening to popular music, seeing movies, right? Obviously, Pretty Woman is the most high profile example of a woman where, the most high profile example of a movie where a man essentially purchasing a woman and them falling in love becomes like a feel good story. Have you seen Pretty Woman?
You know, everyone brings it up to me. I have not seen it, but I'm familiar with the story arc and I don't like it.
Yeah, fair enough. Roxanne is the one that everyone has heard. It's the one that you and your grandma will dance to at a wedding. Like you're likely to hear it on the dance floor at most, multi-generationally aged events. It's by the Police. It's from the early 80s. And it styles itself as a kind of sympathetic, it seems like a kind of a rescue narrative, right? So if we just take a look at these lyrics, Sting, the hero, says, Roxanne,
you don't have to put on the red light. Those days are over. You don't have to sell your body to the night. Roxanne,
you don't have to wear that dress tonight. Walk the streets for money. You don't care if it's wrong or if it's right. So if you're Roxanne, what are you thinking at this point?
Yeah, I mean, one is that the focus is always put on the woman and whether what she's doing is morally acceptable or not. The focus is never put on society and the state who push large amounts of women into a situation where the only thing they have to do to survive is to walk the streets. I also just think that, like the point of leaving the sex trade shouldn't be to become economically dependent on a man, right? It should be to become economically independent.
Right. Nor to sort of, become some man's rescue story. I just like what you said makes so much sense. The focus is always on the woman. You would never hear a song called like, Roger, you don't have to go trolling the streets for a blowjob tonight. Like, you don't have to do that. You could go home to your kids, get some therapy, and like deal with whatever drives you to want to dominate and purchase and own. But like to even suggest an alternate version is to realize how absurdly, how obvious that is as a message, but how it's just never said. We don't put the onus on the one who actually has the agency, the one with the dollar bill in his hand. And then Sting has the temerity to say, I loved you since I knew you. I wouldn't talk down to you. Oh, you wouldn't, would you? I think this entire song is talking down to her. I have to tell you just how I feel. I won't share you with another boy. So that's what this is about. He's jealous. So I'm going to like buy your way out of this trade. I'll do whatever. I'll make whatever deal I have to make with your pimp, I guess, because I will not share you with another boy.
I know my mind is made up, so put away your makeup. Told you once, I won't tell you again. It's a bad way.
Yeah, and I think it's like also, so one, women are not property. You don't decide, like they're not here for your consumption. And you don't get to decide who you share her with. She can make up her own mind.
Yeah.
And I think this just goes to show you in a very real way how marriage and prostitution are sort of two sides of the same coin, right? It's like when you come from this mindset, whether you're a trick and you're buying sex from her, or whether you're her husband, you see her as a commodity that you consume and that you are the master. And I think we need to really break that.
And your private dancer, a dancer for money. Do what you want me to do. private dancer, a dancer for money, and any old music.
Other men have tried to write songs that are a little bit more nuanced, thoughtful, and about the sex trade. And one that actually surprised me, because it's not sung by a man, it's sung by a woman, Tina Turner, is the song Private Dancer. And I mean, these are all boomer names, but Tina Turner, from great soul singer who had a comeback in the 80s with this particular album. And then Mark Knopfler wrote it. He's the lead singer and guitarist of Dire Straits, another huge British rock band of the time.
We are the Sultans. We are the Sultans of Swing.
And I was surprised to find out that he was the songwriter of this song. So, and as a kid, this song always made me uncomfortable, but I think in like a good way, because I got to say, I had a real sense of sympathy for her, and especially the way Tina sings it. Like, it may not be a perfect song lyrically, but she sings it with a kind of resignation and fatigue in her lower register, especially in the verses.
Well, the men come in these places, and the men are all the same. You don't look at their faces, and you don't ask their names. You don't think of them as human. You don't think of them at all. You keep your mind on the money, keeping your
eyes on the wall. The line that you don't think of them as human, you don't think of them at all, is the surprising line for me, because we think of, certain kinds of work or certain kinds of exploitation as dehumanizing, but like, in order to make it through the day, this character has to not even think of the Johns as human.
Yeah, so there's a few things. The first thing is that I think this also goes to show you that when you put human bodies, human intimacy, and human sexuality in a transaction, when you make them commodities, both sides of the interaction become dehumanized. Now, obviously, that doesn't erase the power imbalance where the client sits at the top and the woman in the sex trade sits at the bottom.
Yeah.
But in a certain way, both parties do become dehumanized. He sees her as a means to an end for his own pleasure, and she sees him as a bag of money. And they're both trying to get everything they can out of the other party. So one, it's that dehumanizing effect. Two is that, in terms of not having to think of him as human, not asking his name, I think it also goes to show you the sort of split self that happens in the sex trade, which is that you have to stop yourself from even possibly developing an attraction to someone, which is hard, because when you're having sex with someone and you're looking at them in the eyes, I mean, it's very intimate. And sometimes you could develop feelings, but you have to stop yourself. And to do that, you compartmentalize and you split yourself into two separate people.
My dad's sort of well known for his work on trauma. And one of the things he says about trauma is that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. And it's that split from the self, having to section ourselves off because being ourselves is too painful, because living our full experience is intolerable, unbearable, right? So I think when we think about women being traumatized in these sorts of situations, we think it's because something happened, right? On a particular day, on a particular street, at a particular time of night, a particular guy cornered you and did a particular thing. But what I hear you saying is that there's something inherently in the work itself that can require of someone that they go dead to a part of themselves, or that they split their personality.
Yeah, and I would recommend the book Being and Being Bought by Kaja Ekis Ekman. And she talks about this sort of mind-body split that you have to do. And I think it it lines up well with the statistics and research done on dissociation.
Mhm.
For those of us in the sex trade, how often we have to dissociate during the act in
Yeah.
order to get through it.
And in your experience, do a lot of these women come into the sex trade already with some of these splits in them from previous sexual trauma? I mean, that's what I've read statistically, but what's the on the ground reality of that?
I mean, I think so. I think part of it too is just because a lot of us have had really rough backgrounds. I mean, it's
Right.
not rich women entering the sex trade, it's poor women. It's women who were cut out from the formal economy, women who've struggled their whole lives. So, the more oppressed you are because of your class and also your gender, the more likely you are to experience sexual violence, including at a young age. And so a
Right.
lot of us come in already with those scars, oftentimes that are not healed.
Got it. Yeah. In the second verse, he, but through her, says, because again, the songwriter's a man, she says, I want to make $1 million. I want to live out by the sea.
Have a husband and some children. Yeah, I guess I want a family.
That's some pretty good character writing there. There's a kind of like idle fantasizing, like she kind of knows it's out of reach. But did you find that in the sex trade that there were that women there had dreams that this was going to open up and lead them somewhere like that, something stable, something settled down?
Absolutely. A lot of us sort of talk about how one day, like, we want to find, someone that we love, or we want to do something else eventually. But for
Hmm.
most of us, that day maybe never comes, or when it does come, it's not by choice.
Hmm.
Uh, I just talked to one of my friends who's still in the sex trade, and she told me, like, one day I'll be ready to sort of leave and do something else. But our society doesn't really work that way. And our society isn't great at giving people second chances, at helping people. Um, and so, a lot of times that doesn't happen. Not to mention the fact that, like, we see the worst side of men, the worst side of the worst men in society. So it almost gives us a complex when we're
Yeah.
dating men. And it's like I've seen thousands of husbands, with
Yeah.
pictures of their wife and their kids in their
That's
wallet.
that's the side of marriage. You got to see marriage's underside, right?
Exactly. And it just makes you wonder, like, is this how all men are?
Hmm.
Or are there like so-called good men? And it takes a long time to recover from.
I'm gonna take the money I make and I'm gonna go away.
Okay, cool. Well, why don't we look at a lyric that I think this song is written from a place that feels, and you'll have to tell me. It's by Ani DiFranco, and it's written from a place that feels authentic to me. And I don't know that Ani ever worked in the sex trade per se, but I know that she lived in the East Village in the late 80s by herself as a 16-year-old. I know that she had friends in all kinds of places of society, and she's someone who exudes solidarity and human compassion and insight and warmth and sharp political critique in her writing. So I remember when I first heard her play this song live in Montreal, I guess it would have been in 95 or something. It just blew my head off, and watching the women around me respond to it, most of whom I'm sure had never been in the sex trade, but she was naming something. So it's written. It's not like Private Dancer where she's just sort of telling you a story about her life. She's right there talking to a John. I mean, the song is literally called Letter to a John. And this is where I learned the term John. I just thought John was my uncle's name.
Don't ask me why I'm crying. I'm not gonna tell you what's wrong. I'm just gonna sit on your lap for $5 a song. I want you to pay me for my beauty. I think it's only right, 'cause I have been paying for it all of my life.
Yeah. I think that for many of us, I mean, that line, like, pay me for my beauty because I've been paying for it my whole life. I mean, many of us have been sexually abused, sexually assaulted, sort of used by men. And so in some ways being paid by them is it's like, well, at least now I'm getting money from it, you know? And I think it just sort of exposes the deeper problem of how women are treated and the
Mhm.
kind of sexual violence and commodification that we face, whether we're in the sex trade or not.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's like, it's cold comfort, but I'll take, and then the chorus is, I'm going to take the money I make and I'm going to go away. Now, to be a man in the audience of an Ani DiFranco concert, at least for me, was very confronting, because I realized, I don't get off scot-free here. Like she's letting me know. She's kind of basically setting up. She's like, now now which side are you on? Like I can't feign ignorance anymore. And the next verse I think is so sly. She says, we barely have time to react in this world, let alone rehearse. And I don't think that I'm better than you, but I don't think that I'm worse. Women learn to be women and men learn to be men. And I don't blame it all on you, but I don't want to be your friend.
Yeah. So, this line, I don't blame it all on you, but I don't want to be your friend. It kind of reminds me of a lyric from a Cardi B song, uh, which is called Trick, and it's on her album Gangsta Bitch Music Volume 1. But she says, she's basically giving 10 rules for tricks, how they need to act. One of them is like, no raw sex, right, etc. But she says, pay for the licks, you ain't getting no kiss. I ain't your bitch, you ain't shit. No hugs, no love, you a trick.
Rule number 6, when we in the club, don't be taking no pics. Pay for the licks, you ain't getting no kiss, nigga. I ain't your bitch, nigga. You ain't shit, nigga. No hugs, no love, you use a big trick. You ain't nothing but a...
You ain't nothing but a trick. And I think it reminds me of this song by Ani DiFranco, because, a lot of times these men, they're already demanding so much from you, right? They demand you look a certain way. They demand you do things for them, that you let them do things to you. And then on top of that, they want you to act like you're their friend or their girlfriend. They require all this emotional labor on top of the sexual and physical labor that they're so demanding of. And I think in the end, it just goes to show this is a transaction. Like, this is what you know what you are getting yourself into. So why are you acting like this is something that it's not? If it was a mutual relationship, then I wouldn't need money to be in your presence. But then I also hear but it's not all your fault. And I think it goes to show that there's a sort of broader system that's really indicted in this, and it's not simply the single client.
It's actually not about you. It's about the system you're part of. But
yeah,
I mean, that's what responsibility is, really. It's like acknowledging, okay, what systems have I inherited? And then now what do I want to do about it? And then the next verse is really gut wrenching about just, her background.
I was 11 years old. He was as old as my dad, and he took something from me I didn't even know that I had. So don't tell me about decency. Don't tell me about pride. Just give me something for my trouble, 'cause this time it's not a free ride. I'm just gonna take.
It's like, when you're in that position, you must feel like you're just a target of, everyone has an opinion and everyone has a point of view and everyone sees you through a particular filter, and they're like, where are you in all that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's oftentimes I never got any hate from the people that you would consider sex trade abolitionists or radical feminists. I mean, I got hate from liberals who previously were like, sex work is work. And the moment I started doing it, they got very uncomfortable with it.
One last song I want to throw at you. This is a bit of a curveball, but I thought of it this morning, and it does have a trans angle, and it's from a long time ago. It's from the 60s.
Wrong! In fact, it came out in 1972. Do better, Daniel.
Now, I've never loved this song. A lot of people love it, and you've probably heard it. I'm thinking you probably heard it. Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So Lou Reed has a kind of kind of strung out heroin kind of vibe. Like it's all very seedy. It's East Village circa 1960, whatever, Velvet Underground, hanging out with Andy Warhol and Nico. It's like dive bar art rock. And Walk on the Wild Side is like an iconic rock song. A Tribe Called Quest sampled it beautifully in their song Can I Kick It?
Can I kick it? Yes, we can. Well, I'm gone. Can I kick it?
And this is sort of a coming to New York story. Holly came from Miami, FLA, hitchhiked her way across the USA, plucked her eyebrows on the way, shaved her legs, and then he was a she. She says, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. Well, 1960s, he's not misgendering her. I guess that's something. Candy came from out on the island. In the back room, she was everybody's darling, but she never lost her head. Even when she was giving head, she says, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. And then there's a male hustler. Little Joe never once gave it away. Everybody had to pay and pay. A hustle here and a hustle there. New York City is the place where they said, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. And etc. I guess, maybe he's just paying tribute to people he knew. Maybe he's just, immortalizing people's little sad little stories in a song that's kind of ambivalent in its approach or its tone. But
To me, it almost sounds like it's glamorizing this like wild sort of life, and
Yeah.
it tries to cover all of its bases, like a trans woman, a female, and a man. And like,
yeah,
I just wonder, like, what's the point of this song, if not
A
to
speed-
just sort of
and-
glamorize it?
there's a speed freak. Jackie is just speeding away. I thought she was James Dean so addicts, Then I guess she had to crash. Valium would have helped that bash.
Yeah, it's almost like it kind of reminds me of Carol Lee, who invented the term sex work in order to sanitize the industry and sort of rebrand it.
Mm.
And like she talked about how prostitution was exciting to her and how she fantasized about doing it because it
Mhm.
electrified her like hitchhiking did. It was like an adventure. And it's
Mm.
almost like this very like adventurous look into the lives of real people struggling with, sexual violence, exploitation, homelessness, drug addiction, and sort of like glorifying it and like, oh, like that's part like a sort of like adventurous like tourist, right? Like
Mhm.
you're gonna like take a tour into the real struggles of real people.
It's so tricky because with art, I never want to like impose moral strictures on art, but I do want people to do it well and to do it perfectly, and when you don't quite like, so this song is like, I get it. There's like a subtext of like, this is a sad situation, but yeah, like you're kind of just giving us the sexy parts of it. And then we're kind of in a kind of hip, nonchalant way, just kind of smirking, maybe being like, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But like, I don't really feel the consequences in here. I don't feel the complexity. I just kind of feel a kind of immature, like, oh, well, it is what it isness. And of course, Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground were all part of this scene too. So maybe it was too much to expect for them to like write a song that was like super awake about it. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's interesting though about what you said about Carol Lee and in the term sex work, because I only noticed it starting to crop up in the past 10, 15 years. I never heard the term before. And now it's like everywhere and it's the term you're supposed to use. And one of the things I noticed about your article is you just, as someone who's done that, you don't use that word. You don't use that term. You called yourself a prostituted woman.
Yeah, because what's the point in, changing the name of something when you're not changing the material conditions or the reality of it? I mean, that's what liberals do. They change the name and think everything else is going to change. Like in a similar way, like Biden is doing many of the same things Trump is, but keeping the refugee camp, finishing building the wall, keeping
Right.
kids in cages, but he just calls it something different. And then we're
Yeah.
all supposed to clap for him.
All right, cool. Well, so that's the last lyric I have for you. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other ones, but they're all shitty, like just salacious, sleazy hard rock songs or moralizing weird pop songs. I mean, I'll list them. I don't think I want to put them on a playlist because a lot of these things I don't think are worth the time, but it's been very interesting to get your perspective on it. And, you know, I don't want to tell anyone what to think. I'm sure, you know, you just want to provoke thought, right? And get people to question what the beliefs they've inherited and haven't questioned. And yeah, I just hope out of this episode, if you know, the next time like Big Pimpin' comes on or Roxanne or whatever, like it actually doesn't kill you to stop and be like, what am I dancing to? What am I having fun about? Okay, I'll go back to having fun. But like, even just to notice, fuck, this is weird that this is how we party in our culture, by listening to like an upper crust, like British prep school boy sing about like rescuing a woman off the street because he won't share her with another boy. Like it's fucking strange.
Very strange.
And it has real world consequences, these attitudes, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Don't ask me why I'm crying. I'm not gonna tell you what's wrong.